it's your girl KayVee
and Celine,
and welcome to another episode of the Hood Health Report. Today we're going to talk about an important topic that affects our youth of the country, and that is school lunch debt. So Celine, did you have to pay for lunch growing up through school?
I actually was a part of the children who did not have to pay. I received free lunch or reduced lunch throughout all of my years of being in school. So,
same. I think I had free lunch up until high school, where I had to pay like a quarter or something like that for lunch. But I never really even ate the lunch because sometimes it just, like, I'm not a sloppy Joe girl. That little square pizza was disgusting to me. So I would sometimes just get it for my friends and just, here you go. Y'all have it while somebody go get me some McDonald's or something down the street.
I was the same. I used to buy it or get it, and then I would give it to somebody else, but I never would eat it anyways because it's just like, what would I be paying for? Like, people who actually had to pay for it, I'd be like, you know what, I'll give it to you for free.
Just give it to you.
Yeah.
Who said that?
So, some schools have been penalizing students for lunch debt. This first article, Stop Penalizing Hunger, to put the push to cancel U.S. school lunch debt, goes into this topic a little bit more. As y'all may know, the U.S. offers free school lunches to the poorest students. Many of these students don't qualify for this, and it's a struggle for them to have to pay for school lunches. According to the Education Data Initiative, more than 30 million students in the U.S. can't afford their school meals. On average, those students owe more than $180.60 each. The national total for this is $262 million in school lunch debt annually. In Pennsylvania, there is a Pennsylvania Cancel School Lunch Debt Coalition. I think this is really cool. It's an activist group that's associated with the local Democratic Socialists of America chapter and the Debt Collective for Debtors Union. The coalition has since organized to have over 20,000 in school meal debt canceled in the Buck County area. And the state legislators introduced this bill to provide universal school lunches for that state. They provided universal school meals nationwide during the pandemic, but that ended like last year, so they're not able to, everybody isn't getting free lunch anymore. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Congress authorized that the USDA provide free meals to every public school student in the country, about 50 million children. But in 2022, when the program was scheduled to expire, Republican lawmakers blocked its attempts to extend the program, which was really sad because a lot of students depend on these meals in order to be able to, have a successful day at school. Not every child is able to bring their lunch or able to receive free lunch. At the same time, over the pandemic era, safety nets began evaporating for child poverty and more than doubled in 2022. The Pennsylvania State Senator, John Fetterman, introduced a bill that would cancel all student meal debt. And the bill was titled the School Lunch Debt Cancellation Act. And it will order the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, to pay off all the debt for the students that the students accumulated when they couldn't afford their school lunches or breakfasts. This legislator also is a co-sponsor of the Universal School Meals Program Act, a bill that would provide free breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack to every student, which I think is really important. And then the U.S. public and nonprofit private schools use the three-tier system to determine whether students should pay or should not pay for their meals. Students living within that 130% of poverty line are eligible to receive free lunches or meals, and then the ones that aren't able are the 185%. They can receive meals at a reduced price And then all the other students who don't fall into those lines, they have to pay for the full price of the meal. This means that many families who are not eligible to receive free or reduced meals still might struggle to pay for these meals. And you don't necessarily know what a family is going through. Like, I know a lot of times people see a family and they say, oh, you're in this income bracket, you should be able to afford this meal, but they're not taking into account that student might have an older sister who's in college, or they might have a grandparent that they're having to watch after or take care of. So a lot of times when they are creating these bills, they aren't looking into the fact that somebody might have other outside sources that their money is going to, and may not be able to access that money may not be able to easily access those funds to be able to pay for school lunches. And then schools are not allowed to use federal child nutrition funds to pay off the meal debts right now. So many instead search for charitable donors in order to pay for those things, and they have to tap into the student activity funds or educational funds in order to pay for those lunches.
Which is just crazy to me that they would have to dip into the funds that are earmarked for supplies or paraprofessionals to pay off school lunch debts. There should absolutely be a fund that we can take the money from, not just to be there to be all pretty and glorified, but that we can actually use those funds for the student lunch debt crisis.
Exactly. And then another thing that schools do, which I feel like is a horrible thing, is that they publicly shame students or give them those sandwiches instead of hot meals. I'm not sure if your school did that, but my school, every school that I went to did that. So they would let you get your lunch, right? And then you would get to the front. If you didn't have any money on your account, they would either throw the food away or they would give you a cold sandwich and say, oh, this is what you can have to eat today.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because you're throwing the food away, so now it still has to be paid for anyway, just to shame somebody by giving them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a better way that could be handled instead of just publicly embarrassing a child or saying, oh, you owe this amount. They used to also give us those little stickers with saying how much money you owe back to the school or whatever the case may be. I think all of that just needs to be taken away. 9 states, though, California, Colorado, Illinois, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Mexico, and Vermont have introduced programs making school breakfasts and lunch permanently free, which is a good thing. And advocates are calling on lawmakers to make school meals free nationwide. Hunger can be one of the most challenging things for students, and hunger can be one of the most challenging things for students. And if you are hungry, then it's known that you don't perform as well in school. They've done research on this. So the fact that they are pushing for school lunches to be free, I think that's a great initiative. In the pre-pandemic study, the organization No Kid Hungry Foundation found that nearly 60% of children from low-income communities went to school hungry, and of those, 12% said that the hunger made it impossible for them to concentrate or even finish doing their homework. So food insecurity is also linked to other adverse mental health outcomes for children. And the fact that they're in school and hoping to get an education, you want to try to create an environment where they're not necessarily, focused on the fact that they're hungry or the fact that they might not be able to eat lunch today because they don't have any money on their account, or worried about, being publicly shamed if they don't have the money to afford a lunch that day. All of those things, play into a child having a better outcome.
Yes, they also mentioned that the CDC found that students who eat school meals and eat healthier overall do better in school than those who don't. So it's with this knowledge and knowing that kids are going hungry so it can affect how they focus on their schoolwork, you would think that the government would care enough to make school lunches more affordable or easily accessible, or create programs that could sponsor the lunches for the children.
Right.
How school lunch debt creates shame and inequality in our fight to abolish it. So this article is talking about how too many people consider debt a moral failing in our individualist and capitalist society, and how that is trickling down to children and just kind of giving them stress and anxiety way too early about money and debt and falling behind. So these acts result in lunch shaming, where students were forced to throw away the hot meals, like you explained in the last article, and if they cannot pay, and instead they're given a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a tuna sandwich. Mm-hmm. Like I said, it's just crazy because they would still have to pay for that meal because it's being thrown away. So to not even let the child have the meal, even if it's for free, or if you just charge it to their account and they have to pay it off later, to throw it away is like the worst abuse of power in having this food, because it could have at least been eaten and provided for a child in that way. So a lot of people mentioned that the paperwork to even apply for free or reduced lunch can be very burdensome, and it requires multiple forms, it requests proof of income, and a lot of parents, they feel like it's too much. Like they can't really access the paperwork if they don't have computers at home, and then having to get their proof of income, whether that be W-2s or this or that, it's just a lot of work on the parents' end that they might not know up front. And then having to do this form every year, especially when you have multiple kids and you're trying to, work to provide. I can see where this could easily become more of a task than parents sign up for. So school meals are a right and should be treated as such, because if you're going to require somebody's children to be somewhere for 7 or 8 hours a day, you should also feed them. If that's the case, parents can find better means where their children could not be susceptible to bullying, not be susceptible to hunger, and still can get the information that they need from a school front.
Yeah. You mentioned that, and it made me think, it probably was in this same article, they talked about how children don't necessarily pay for textbooks because they need a textbook in order to learn. So you would think they would do the same thing as far as food, because children need to eat. You would provide them food while they're at school, especially if it's a public school.
So community eligibility provisions is a program that would permit schools to give every student free meals if the number of households participating in the federal welfare program is at least 40% of families. So Philadelphia, New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Houston are enrolled. However, more than half of the eligible schools decline because the reimbursement rate is not always enough to cover cost. So this is another ridiculous fact to learn, because it's like people are going out of their way. Lawmakers are creating these programs of ways for students to get these free meals, but we also still have to have the buy-in from the community and the individual schools. And so if they don't see that it's rewarding for them, they still won't even approve and adopt these programs. So that was really crazy to me, that many states had tried something and then the schools were still like, well, the reimbursement rate is only 70% of what we're actually paying. So no, we're gonna do away with this program and the kids will just have to be hungry.
Yeah.
So states without such programs are prohibited from using federal reimbursements, as you mentioned, because they rely on charitable donations. To follow up on the lunch shaming, some schools prevent students from going on field trips or graduating if they have lunch debt, which is crazy to me, because a lot of these field trips that the students go on are extensions of the learning in the classroom. So not only are you not preparing them to learn in the classroom, you're prohibiting them from learning outside of the classroom, which is a lot of times the most effective learning, because some people have to learn by example or learn from actually going through stuff versus just sitting in the classroom and receiving instructions. So to prevent them from going on field trips or even graduating because they have a debt, it's heinous acts.
It is.
That's what I was just about to say. There's actually a recent, while we're on the topic of prohibiting, not quite school lunch, but still on the topic of prohibiting students from their activities, Here in Memphis, they prohibited a young boy, he was a senior, from going to his prom because they said that he hadn't turned in a laptop. And then he was like, I did turn in the laptop, and still would not let him go to his prom. After the prom, they found, oh, he did turn in the laptop. The teacher had just misplaced it. So now he has to, not have a prom experience in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
And so the community has banded together, and they've got a DJ, they got the kids a party bus, and just really trying to make up for this young boy missing prom because it was not his fault. And even if it was his fault, to have to miss out on this rather than just, okay, well, here's the fee that you would have to pay to replace it, it's just not right to do to children.
Yeah, it's almost like they want to punish them and put them down. I mean, of course, it all goes back to shaming them, but one of those things is as a child, you want to have those experiences. So for you to take away that experience when you could do other alternate things, give them the slip, tell them how much it costs and stuff like that. Those are still all feasible things that you could do to a child, but society
is a mess. So not only are the students affected by the lack of lunch stability, but some of the teachers then have to go into their pockets to provide snacks, because this article mentions the teachers that really care about their students learning, and whether a hungry student is going to be disrupting the class for everybody, they have to provide snacks. So they said the teachers were buying granola bars, chips, things like that to kind of keep in their desk for when they know their students are hungry, to provide some type of nourishment to them. And we already know teachers do not get paid enough to live, let alone have to buy school supplies and food for their students. So yeah, it was just a mess reading that. This article also touched on Philando Castile, who was killed by the police back in 2016. He was a cafeteria worker. He was a cafeteria manager in a school. I think it was a high school. I can't remember. But he was a cafeteria manager in a school, and he would often use his own money to pay off the lunch debts at that school. So after his murder, his mom gave thousands of dollars on his behalf to write off the school lunch debts in his honor.
Yeah, which is beautiful. And it's not something that necessarily he should have been the person having to do. I always feel like there is available funds for these types of things. It shouldn't be on one person, especially somebody that's just in the community seeing the struggle. So it's like if a cafeteria worker can see that, children need their lunch debt paid off, or a teacher can see that a child is hungry, why aren't the schools doing more to provide for them? It's a sad but beautiful thing that his mother even honored him by doing that, but it really shouldn't have even been on him or that family to be the people to have to do that.
Exactly. Especially, like you said, there should be earmarked funds for things like this. But then we see every year somebody's making some legislation to take more money from the schools to give over to some other sector that might not really need them. For example, I'm trying to figure out when Memphis started getting these SUV cop cars? What was the purpose? What was the need? That could have been used for schools. This is the money that we're taking from schools to give over to the police department for them to have nicer cars when our teachers are underpaid and our children are hungry.
Don't get me started on that, because I could go down a long rabbit hole about suppression and all those type of implements instead of intervention and prevention efforts. We could definitely go a different route instead of putting the money there and put that money into prevention, into intervention, so that way we wouldn't even have to have newer police cars or all that money going towards those things. I don't want to go there. I could really go on and on about it. You also mentioned earlier on about just going back into the food shaming and them throwing away food. We did an episode on food waste, and it kind of goes back into that too, because it's one of those things where America already wastes a lot of food. So not only could we be more sustainable if we were able to allow children to just eat the food, because a lot of times at the end of the week, I know at my old school, they used to have some of the meals from the days before. You could pick what you wanted to eat let's say if they had pizza or they had burgers the day before. So it's like they do waste that food. They don't keep it. So if it's not being eaten, it's getting thrown away. And that is also creating food waste. So a lot of you may be wondering why federal programming allows schools to provide free lunch to end. In this article, America's School Lunch Crisis, I will go into some of the details about the federal programming's ending. So I mentioned a little bit about this earlier. In 2020, when schools across the country started closing because of COVID-19, federal lawmakers did something that they had never done before, which was they decided to make all lunches free for students in public schools. This allowed millions of children to be able to have lunch for the first time at free or reduced prices. The policymakers knew that they needed to do this because there was a pandemic going on. The effect of these free meals was dramatic. Parents no longer had to worry about, paying for food and stuff like that, especially because a lot of parents were going through things like layoffs with jobs, illnesses, grief, a lot of different things that people were going through throughout COVID-19. So they had one less stress that they had to worry about, which was the cost of food. Right now, they said that the average meal at schools is $2.50 a meal. And that's like on the lower side. So some schools it's reaching like $3, $4 for a meal. Some schools, like in California, I think it's like almost $5 for lunch. And that makes it about like $50 monthly for expense for every child in that household. And that can make any family, whether or not you have one child or 3 children, 10 children, they can cause those stresses on a parent. As a result, the food insecurity is at risk for households with children. Food insecurity is at risk for households with children, and it declined by like 7% between the pandemic and the summer of 2021. Schools, meanwhile, were able to skip time-consuming paperwork throughout that time period too. Like you mentioned, they do have to fill out like a whole bunch of forms in order to even receive free lunch. So a lot of times, if you have more than one child, let's say you have more than one child at different schools, you have to fill out the paperwork for each school that the child goes to, and you have to do that every year. And if you miss a year, then your child is no longer eligible for free lunch, and you're responsible for that child. But throughout the pandemic, they waived those forms, so you didn't even have to fill out the paperwork. You could just go ahead and allow the student to have free lunch. Now that it's over, which a lot of people didn't even know the program ended, they weren't aware that they needed to go back and fill out those paperwork again, or that they had to fill it out every year, or they had to fill it out for every child. So they also put a lot of extra stress on parents because they have to be able to make time to get those forms to be able to fill them out so that way that the children can get their free lunch. So the federal waiver program, which costs about $11 billion per school year, expired, and it forced school districts to start charging for school lunch again, and that's dealing with the inflation rates as well. Some families struggle to add another daily expense to these, to their already, extensive things. You have to think about it. A lot of people following COVID didn't have a job. They possibly lost parents. They possibly lost grandparents. They possibly were struggling with their own things that they had to deal with. So now they're back having to pay for these things. And a lot of them are sacrificing being able to afford other things in order to provide for their children. When the program expired in 2022, childhood poverty increased by 41%. And they also said that because of this, they had to raise prices on the food and stuff like that, which you would think they would need to do the opposite. If people are saying that they're in poverty and they aren't able to afford school lunches, then instead of having the prices raised to match, the standard of living, you would think they would need to bring the prices down so that people could either afford it or still be able to buy in and pay something. Or that the lawmakers would look at this and say, hey, because of COVID-19 or because of all these things that are going on, maybe we should continue or extend that program because it is doing so much good for, the United States or communities that might be affected by these things. But they decided that no, they did not want to continue with the current program. So now that has expired and we're just seeing a whole bunch of decline as far as people being able to afford lunches, students being able to perform well in school because of those things, and so forth.
Schools ended universal free lunch. Now meal debt is soaring. So this article talks about how cafeteria staff have noticed a drop in the number of students that receive lunch following the end of the pandemic. When meals were free last year, schools served more than 80 million more meals compared to the year before the pandemic, which it makes sense because since they weren't prepared for school to just be out like that. There was all this food that they had in the freezers and everything. So yeah, they created the program to where parents could just pick up the food and distribute it at home. But it's like, okay, well, if you knew that you had the means to do something then, where is that rollover or that carryover to kind of care a little bit more once the pandemic is over and they're back in the schools? You would think that something would have, it would have been a little bit of give and take for them to be able to provide students with these meals. So some cafeteria staff can also see the amount of money owed for meals they haven't paid for. So this school year, with an abrupt switch from the pandemic era free meals to a paid system. A recent survey from the School Nutrition Association found that school districts had more than $19 million in unpaid meal debt. New lawmakers are trying to find ways to fix this problem, especially since they found that kids who ate at school had overall healthier diets. Prior to the pandemic, about 1 in 3 school districts in the U.S. were already serving free meals to all students through community eligibility. But this program did not mean an increase in federal funding. So because states or schools would have to fund these programs themselves, not all eligible districts choose to participate. And that's what we were talking about in the previous couple articles back, where if they had to pay for it, they weren't gonna pay for it. It had to be federally funded for a lot of schools to adopt these programs. School districts across the U.S. are reporting signs that families might be struggling to afford school meals, but most schools won't deny a student a meal even if they can't pay, but they will track their debt and try to collect from families throughout the school year. This year, school officials say meal debt is reaching levels that they have never seen. Lawmakers at the state and federal level are looking for ways to fix a growing problem. The U.S. Department of Agriculture recently proposed an expansion to a free meal program to try to feed significantly more kids at high-need schools. Many families didn't know they needed to reapply after 2 years of the automatic free meals, which is what we already mentioned. Like I said, if they have multiple kids trying to do this while some parents working 2 jobs, having to do this every year, some things just kind of slip through the cracks. Yeah. So the USDA proposed a new rule to expand something called the Community Eligibility Provision. It allows schools and districts with a lot of high-need students to serve free meals to all of their kids without families having to specifically apply.
That's nice.
So that would be great. Mm-hmm. That the parents wouldn't have to apply and they're still providing these meals. The USDA also wants to lower the threshold of high-need students from 40% to 25%, allowing more schools to qualify for the program, because that is a large number. Like, well, if almost half of your students need the services, then we'll give it. But if not, nobody gets it.
Right.
That's kind of like...
Which to me, I just don't think that's necessarily, not even that it should be fair, but even equity, or like allowing students that you might might go to school in a great district. Let's say your parents want you to have a better future, so they get you a transfer to a school, and now they have to not only provide for you to get to the school, but they have to provide lunch and stuff like that for you because they're trying to do better for you. I sometimes feel like it shouldn't necessarily be about a percentage of people that aren't performing well. It should really be more based on the fact that you are a child and you're going to school. You need to provide them with lunch regardless of whether or not they're able to afford it or not.
And then you also have to think about breakfast. Like when kids get to school early and they're not even able to get breakfast at the schools, like, when it was a lot cheaper to do that. So that's something that is not even factored into a lot of these figures, are the cost for breakfast.
Man, you mentioned also, and it made me think about my nephew. They can tell you how much money you owe. So he comes home sometimes and he'll call his mom or one of us and he'll be like, they told me I'm in debt. We have to pay. And I'd be like, the fact that he thinks that he's in debt and he's like he's 10 years old and they're telling him that he's in debt or that he owes money and he's like concerned about it. I feel like that's something that a child shouldn't necessarily even be privy to, or like they shouldn't even have that information. So like I think it should be one of those things where they send an email to the parent or they call the parent or something like that. But having a child go home and have to report, oh mom, oh mom, this is going on. They told me that tomorrow if I don't have the money that they're gonna give me, you know, a cold sandwich because you haven't paid in a week or something like that. It's just, I don't like it.
Yeah, it's definitely putting unnecessary stress on students, which can also affect how they behave in the classroom, or how, you know, now they know that they don't have the money, or what if he forgot? You know, not even saying that somebody didn't have the money, but what if he just plain old forgot, like a lot of kids do. That's why you shouldn't send the message through the children.
Yeah, kids forget everything. Well, a lot of things, like that's not the first thing that's on their mind after a long day is, oh, let me go home and tell my mom that I forgot to pay for lunch, or she forgot to add lunch money to my account.
And then some of these articles also mention how some students don't even go to the cafeteria because they know that they can't afford it and they don't want to sit around the rest of their friends who are eating lunch. So they just kind of find some trouble to get in, or just find something else to do during lunchtime because they don't want to be embarrassed or ashamed of the fact that they're not able to get lunch as well.
Right.
So in the U.S. overall, about 75% of the eligible schools choose to adopt the program last year, but some states had much lower rates of adoption. President Joe Biden requested $15 million over the next 10 years in his 2024 budget to fund expanded access to the community eligibility program. The administration says this would expand the program to an additional 9 million children around the country.
Just so we can have a little bit of information on stuff going on in Tennessee, because we are in Memphis, I'm going to provide y'all with a little bit of knowledge about the school lunches in Tennessee. So Tennessee School Nutrition Program is responsible for providing nutritious meals and snacks to students in public and private schools, as well as residential and child care institutions. School breakfast program, after school snack program across the state, and all public schools in Tennessee are on the National School Lunch Program, which provides nutritionally balanced, low-cost, free lunches to children in each school every day. And then just on a final note, outside of that, I wanted to end the episode with something positive. So Arby's Foundation pays off school lunch debt for students in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. So the local Arby's franchise paid $74,000 on a grant. The money comes from the Arby's Foundation. The grant eliminates the past burdens and provides a fresh start for millions of families around the Wisconsin area for free school lunch meals. And I thought that was great because I feel like, you know, having a grant or being able to have that fresh start is really needed. I do wish that it didn't necessarily have to come from, like, you know, corporations, but, you know, it's a start. I do think, like, you know, lawmakers should try to do these things or provide more grants so they can pay off these types of things. But, you know, I thought that was something that was, you know, nice and refreshing.
And I found a lot of articles like that where it would be corporations or businesses or entrepreneurs that are writing checks for the schools so that the children can all have access to free meals. So it's good that someone in the community is doing it, even if it's not the government or the schools itself. We see that people feel strongly about these school lunches.
Yeah, as they should.
So that concludes this episode of the Hood Health. So that concludes this episode of the Hood Health Report. Hope you guys enjoyed.
So this is a wrap for this episode. I hope y'all enjoyed it. You can follow us on Instagram, which is Hood Health Report, as well as Facebook. And Twitter, Hood Health Pod.
We also have a TikTok page now, Hood Health Report. Follow us there.
Yeah.
Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. All of the links will be in the descriptions and the bios for you to click on.
Tap, like, comment, do it all.
Subscribe, all of the things. Share it with a friend.
Yes.
Share it on your social media.
If you have a TikTok, make a little video, send it.
Let us know you're out there watching, guys. All right, that's it for this